There is a color you have never seen. Not because your eyes cannot perceive it, because it no longer exists in the form it once existed in. It was called Tyrian purple. It took 12,000 sea snails to produce 1 gram of it. Roman emperors wore it. Byzantine rulers made it a capital offense for anyone outside the imperial family to possess it. For 1,000 years, it was the most expensive substance on earth by weight, worth more than gold, more than spices, more than any other material that human hands could produce. The last person who knew how to make it died sometime in the 15th century. The color died with them. Before 1856, every color that existed on cloth, on paper, on the walls of buildings, on the faces of people who wore cosmetics, had been extracted from something living. Plants, animals, minerals ground to powder. The trade that did the extracting was called the dyer's craft, and the knowledge it accumulated over 3,000 years of practice, which plants produced which colors, which mordants fixed which dyes to which fibers, which sequences of baths and temperatures and acidities produced colors that did not fade in sunlight or wash out in rain. That knowledge was among the most complex practical chemistry in the pre-industrial world. It was held entirely in the hands and memories of the men and women who practiced it. And it was destroyed in 1 generation by a teenage boy who was trying to make quinine. The madder plant produces red. Not one red, dozens of reds. The specific red depends on the part of the plant used, the age of the roots at harvest, the mineral content of the soil it grew in, the mordant used to fix the dye to the fiber, and the temperature and duration of the dye bath. A master dyer working with madder in a workshop in Provence in 1800 could produce a red that matched a specific client's specification to within what a modern colorimeter would measure as 2 delta E units, effectively indistinguishable to the human eye. He could reproduce that red the following season and the season after because he knew his madder fields, knew his water source, knew his mordant proportions, knew every variable in his process well enough to hold the outcome constant across years. His formula was not written down. It lived in him. The red he produced was turkey red, a specific shade achieved through a process involving oil treatment of the fiber before dyeing, followed by multiple mordant baths, followed by the madder dye bath itself, followed by a brightening bath in a solution that shifted the hue toward the warm scarlet that Turkish and Persian textiles had been producing for centuries. The full turkey red process involved 17 separate steps. Each step had variables. The master dyer held all 17 steps and all their variables in his memory and his hands simultaneously. A bolt of turkey red cloth produced in his workshop did not fade. 200-year-old turkey red textiles in museum collections are still as vivid as they were when made. No synthetic red of equivalent longevity has been produced. Woad produced blue. The woad plant, grown across northern Europe from the medieval period onward, produced a blue dye through a fermentation process that was, by any measure, one of the most unpleasant industrial operations in pre-industrial history. Woad leaves were harvested, ground to a paste, formed into balls and dried. The dried balls were then wetted and allowed to ferment in large vats. The fermentation produced ammonia and other compounds that created the alkaline-reducing conditions necessary for the dye to bond to fiber. The smell of a working woad vat was documented by visitors across several centuries in terms that leave no ambiguity. Queen Elizabeth I reportedly issued a royal proclamation in 1577 forbidding woad processing within 5 miles of any royal residence she might visit. The master dyer managing a woad vat was managing a living biological process. He maintained the vat's temperature by adding warm water or covering it at night. He managed its chemistry by adding alkaline materials, wood ash, stale urine, bran, in proportions that maintained the reducing conditions the dye required. He tested the vat by feel, by smell, by a specific visual indicator. A healthy woad vat produced a blue-purple foam on its surface when stirred. The foam told the dyer the vat was ready to dye. No foam and the vat was exhausted. Wrong color foam and the chemistry was off. The dyer adjusted. There was no instrument that measured what the dyer was reading. There was only his accumulated knowledge of what a healthy vat looked, smelled, and felt like. Indigo arrived in Europe from India in the 16th century and largely replaced woad because it produced a more intense blue from a smaller quantity of plant material. The indigo trade drove the plantation economies of South Carolina and Georgia in the 18th century, where enslaved workers cultivated, harvested, and processed indigo under conditions that the planters who profited from the crop did not experience. The knowledge of indigo cultivation and processing that made South Carolina's indigo commercially viable was brought to the colony by enslaved people from West Africa and the Caribbean who had been working with indigo for generations. Their names are not in the trade records. The records document the planters. The knowledge that made the planters wealthy was not theirs. In 1856, an 18-year-old chemistry student named William Henry Perkin was attempting to synthesize quinine in a makeshift laboratory in his bedroom in London. He failed to make quinine. What he produced instead was a brownish sludge that, when dissolved in alcohol, produced a brilliant purple. Perkin recognized what he had. He patented the dye, named it Movine, and within a year had built a factory producing the first synthetic dye in history. The color it produced, a warm purple that Queen Victoria wore to her daughter's wedding in 1858, was not Tyrian purple. It was a new color that had never existed before because it came from coal tar, a waste product of gas lighting, rather than from any living thing. The synthetic dye industry that grew from Perkin's discovery moved faster than almost any industrial transition in history. By 1870, German chemical companies had synthesized equivalents of the major natural dyes. Alizarin, the active compound in madder, was synthesized in 1868. Synthetic indigo followed in 1878. By 1900, the price of natural madder had collapsed. The madder fields of Provence that had supplied European dyers for centuries were being plowed under and replanted with food crops. By 1914, the global trade in natural dyes had fallen to a fraction of its pre-synthetic value. The master dyers, who had spent 20 years learning to manage a turkey red process, watched the market for their knowledge disappear in less than a generation. Here is what synthetic dyes cannot do. The color fastness of naturally dyed historical textiles has been a source of continuing difficulty for conservation scientists. A turkey red textile from 1780 exposed to 200 years of light and handling retains color that modern synthetic equivalents, even those formulated specifically for light fastness, cannot match in accelerated agging tests. The reason is still not fully understood. The best current hypothesis involves the multi-step mordanting process of natural dyeing, which creates a bond between dye molecule and fiber at multiple chemical sites simultaneously. The synthetic equivalent bonds at fewer sites. Under the stress of light and oxidation, the synthetic bond breaks first. The master dyer, who developed the turkey red process over generations of empirical refinement, produced a chemical structure that modern analytical chemistry cannot fully replicate. He did not know why it worked. He knew that it did. And the knowledge of how to produce it, the 17 steps, the variables, the judgment calls that could not be reduced to measurement, was not recorded in any form that survived the transition. There is color around you right now that has been there since before you were born. A curtain that has hung in the same window for 50 years, faded at the edges where the light falls, still vivid in the folds that the light has not reached. A rug on a floor that was laid before the house was renovated, its colors softened by decades of use, but still present, still holding the warmth of the dye that went into it. A piece of fabric in a box somewhere, a dress, a shawl, something passed down through enough hands that the original owner is a name on a family tree rather than a memory. Look at the color in the light. If it was naturally dyed, the color has a depth that synthetic dyes produce only imperfectly, a warmth in the red, a complexity in the blue, a quality that conservators describe as luminosity, the sense that the color is coming from inside the fiber rather than sitting on its surface. That quality came from a process that no longer exists, from knowledge that died in a generation when a teenager's failed chemistry experiment made it unprofitable. The trade that held that knowledge is gone. The colors it produced are still in the world, fading slowly in the light. Is there a naturally dyed textile in your home, a rug, a curtain, a piece of clothing passed down through your family whose color has outlasted everything bought since? Tell me about it in the comments.